Well, hello everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it's time for episode number 273 of Goulet Q&A. It is coming up into the beginning of November here, and we just finished up Fountain Pen Day last week. Last time I published Q&A, this was actually Fountain Pen Day, so now we're coming off of it, and I want to say thank you to everybody who was involved in that, participated in that, supported us, supported the pen community. It's kind of cool to have a kind of a community-sourced holiday like that, something that you don't see necessarily everywhere. But anyway, it was really cool. We had a lot of good support. We were catching up this week. Our team was working really hard. Thank you for everybody who placed an order with us and you were extra patient. Fountain Pen Day and then like around the Black Friday kind of Thanksgiving time frame. Those are the times when we get really like the most behind. Normally we try to have like a 1 to 2 day turnaround. We were pushing more towards 3 days, which was, not to our normal standards, but that's because of increased volume. So we appreciate your patience there. Thank you so much. We should be pretty caught up by the time this video publishes. But anyway, thank you for your patience there. It's kind of crazy, but we are coming up on the Goulet Pens 10th anniversary next week. If I got to be completely honest with you all, which I always am in Q&A, right? We had a lot of different ideas about how we could celebrate it. We talked about hosting a pen event in person, and we got rid of that idea pretty early on. We were going to do that like back in July, and we just could not get the logistics together. And it would have been too overwhelming. We talked about developing some product. We pursued it with several different manufacturers. It all kind of fell through. Basically, just all these special things we tried to do to mark our 10th anniversary, none of them really worked out. So, womp womp. Oh well, that kind of happens sometimes. But we did produce some special videos for you all that you can enjoy. And so we are going to be sharing those with you all this coming week. So that I hope you can enjoy. We figured, okay, if all these other things we've tried to do have fallen through, what's something that we can do that the most people can appreciate and kind of participate in? And we figured, putting videos out there for you all would be one of the best ways to do that. So we will have some of that coming out, and then we'll just be kind of celebrating around here. It's somewhat of an arbitrary date. It's not actually when we were founded. It's the anniversary of when we first started selling fountain pen wares. So that's kind of like, officially where we celebrate our anniversary, our birthday as a company, and that's going to be Sunday of next week, the 17th. So November 17th. So there you go. Crazy. Can't believe it's been 10 years. But anyway, so we have a bunch of products that are coming in. Things are getting crazy because the holidays are approaching. It's always a busy time. Lots of manufacturers are trying to get things out for you all, for your gift purchasing reasons, or maybe self-gift purchasing reasons. Everybody comes out with stuff in November, December, and so the season is upon us. There'll be plenty of it coming out. We have some Galen leather stuff that came out. Drew and I mentioned that in Right Now last week. We had a couple things that were missing, a couple of accessories. I forgot to even talk about them in Right Now, but it's a brass ruler and the protractor. Those came in this week, so that's pretty cool. If you've been waiting for one of those, you can check those out. Did find out we're going to get delayed quite a bit on the writing box with the leather straps. It's going to be like another 8 weeks before we get those. It's just, they're a small manufacturer. Getting supply with these natural materials, it's going to be really touch and go for a while on the stock. So that's unfortunate, but anyway, if you are interested in that, sign up for our email notification list or for anything that's out of stock there. We are definitely looking into more, Galen leather, because they have a lot of other products that we don't carry yet, but it's a new relationship. They're new wholesalers. So I think supply is going to be maybe a thing for a little bit as we get rocking and rolling with them. But hearing good things so far, been popular. So that's pretty cool. Some other pens that are coming out, Visconti Homo Sapiens Skylight. So we put a video about that a little bit in advance. Now we've got those pens in. Love to know your all's feedback. I think that's right. I don't think any of that's right, actually. I'd love to know your feedback. If you happen to get one of these, we would love to hear what you think about them, especially if you have experience with a regular Homo sapiens and you want to see how it compares. Really trying to see. That's a US exclusive, not exclusive to us, but exclusive to the US. So that's pretty rad. Visconti also came out with a newer version of the Torpedo. So they had previously a like ruthenium with the unidirectional carbon fiber. So now they're doing a blue carbon fiber. I've shown this in Q&A before. But they have a rose gold, and then they have a, I think ruthenium, a gunmetal trim or ruthenium trim, I can't remember which. Two different versions of the blue carbon fiber. It's pretty darn cool. So if you're interested in that, we have that now. We also have the Visconti Van Gogh Wheatfield and Crows. So, you know, like 10th the price of the Torpedo. Still very cool pen if you're a fan of the Van Gogh. This is a beautiful blue pen after Van Gogh's painting. The Platinum 3776 Carnelian, still waiting to hear, but it should be really, really soon. May have come by the time this video launches, not sure. I shoot this a couple days before it publishes, so it always gets a little kooky when we have things that are like, you know, we have a whole shipping calendar that we manage through our company so that we all know when things are coming in. We don't always get tracking. Sometimes, you know, we get a partial shipment, a box gets left on the truck, stuff gets delayed. It's all kinds of crazy things happen. So I never know with absolute certainty when we're going to launch something unless we already have it in the building and we're like scheduled it to launch. We did find out their Platinum Profante, which is their new, it's a new lower price pen. That has been delayed till the end of November. So that's kind of a bummer. I've never seen it in person either, but it seems like it has some potential, kind of a variation of the Preppy. So I'm excited to see what that looks like, but it's going to be a couple weeks before we find out more. We have the Montegrappa has a Lord of the Rings limited edition pen, which if you've watched right now on Wednesday, Drew and I, mainly Drew, we're kind of going nuts over that pen. Very cool theming. We got to kind of see that in process when we were there at their factory in Italy a couple weeks ago. And we were really excited to be involved in the actual launch of the pen. So that's pretty cool. It's good to show you all that. Go check out that right now if you haven't seen it. The pen is pretty cool. Colorverse has a new batch of ink in their season 6 that's going to be coming out soon. I don't know a lot of details. I haven't really studied it yet, but I know it's coming. We have some Conklin Durograph Turquoise Nights that now have Jowo nibs. I mentioned that a little bit before, but I think there was just a lot of noise last week with Fountain Pen Day and all that stuff. But Monteverde and Conklin are going to be doing Jowo nibs now, which is a huge deal because they are going to have really good quality, consistent nibs, which has been something that they have struggled with in the past. It's surprisingly hard to get a good stock of good nibs. There's only so many makers out there, and Jowo is pretty much tops. So I'm a big fan of them personally. That's who makes our Goulet nibs. So I may be perhaps a little biased, but no, seriously, they are legitimately good nibs. So excited for those. I think Conklin's the only thing they have so far. Monteverdes are coming, but anyway, we're going to be starting to see pens coming out with those nibs on them. So that's really exciting. And then the Diplomat Aero Flame as well is going to be coming soon if it's not here already. So lots of good stuff, and there will be a lot more coming. That's just, I'm looking at my shipment calendar, and this stuff is like really stacking up, but they all have question marks by them. Stuff's already gotten delayed a bunch, so I don't want to get too excited about something and then have you wait a month. So that's all I know for this week. Yeah, let's get into the questions this week, shall we? Starting out with Pen and Rust, I'm really excited about Q&A today, by the way. I was prepping it and just feeling really good about it. So hope that it lives up to my own expectations. All right, so pen and writing questions. Let's start out with Elizabeth D on Facebook. Will the Montegrappa Elmos have metal threads from now on, or are the new ones coming a kind of subset? Okay, so the newest one that we have currently in stock is the purple one, the Ghizzania Sfrangiata. There, I got it finally. So this one still has resin threads, so it's really right here. If you look, so there is the new series that is, oh my gosh, the name is escaping me. The Blossom, can't remember. Flower Blossom. Flower Blossom? Just look on our site. You'll see it is coming soon. But anyway, there's 3 new colors that are coming out. The colors look really, really cool. They're not exclusive to us. They're going to be I believe a US exclusive. But anyway, so they have been doing the Elmo so far with just, resin threads, which feel really good. They're nice, chunky, hardy threads. So I personally have never had any concerns over quality or longevity or anything like that. I think Montegrappa, in so many of their pens, they work in metal, they just felt better themselves about having metal threads, and so they just really just took it upon themselves for the sake of longevity. I'm not aware of anyone that's had any issues with threads currently, so it's purely just kind of a proactive thing on their part. Maybe it was a little bit aesthetic too. They just kind of like the look of it. Personally, I think it looks great both ways. But anyway, the newer pens that you'll be seeing will be coming with metal threads. And I think it's going to be kind of a rolling change. So I think what they're ending up doing is making most everything in batches. You know, like these pens, they made them all this way. So all the Gonzagna Srangiatas that we have are these resin threads, and that's how they're going to be. But the newer pens that I think are going to come out, the newer Elmos, are all going to start to have metal threads, and that's just how they're going to do it moving forward unless they change their minds on that in the future. So I don't think it's going to be too much mixed stock because mainly they've been producing these in batches. And they don't have a lot of like regular colors. They have the black, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen with the black. Anyway, so they'll be doing these kind of rolling changes with the batches that come out. But either way, we will photograph them, and you'll be able to see before you buy what threads are going to be on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep an eye on the black and see if the threads are something that are going to change. We'll rephotograph it and reflect that accurately, or at least have some kind of indication on there as to what it's going to do. Whenever there's a kind of a key aspect change to something like that, and again, the type of threads is not necessarily something that would be of utmost importance to most people when shopping for a pen, but still, especially if it's something that's very visible, you can see it in a photograph. And because there's just not much metal on this pen, when you throw a big chunk of metal in the middle of it, it can change the look of it for sure. Another thing too, this pen's got a decent amount of weight in it. It's a mostly resin pen, but they actually put a brass sleeve on the inside to weight the pen a little bit better, which I really kind of like because it gives it a really good feel. And then from the pens that I've held so far that have those metal threads, it actually front weights the pen just a little bit more, which I actually don't mind. So I think it's all around, it's kind of a neutral change for me, but I kind of like the weight balance there a little better. Either way, I've felt the threads on both pens. They both feel really smooth. It feels about comparable. It doesn't really feel any different to the fingers. It's pretty much just aesthetic and then kind of that longevity aspect of it. So there you go. Hope that answers that question thoroughly enough for you. All right, next one I have is from Kareem3 on Instagram. What's the best 3 pieces of advice for new users? This is a good one. I'm glad you asked the best 3 pieces of advice and not the one best piece of advice, because I have a really hard time narrowing things down to just one. If you haven't noticed, Drew likes to pick on me that a lot. But I thought 3, okay, I can work with 3. Of course, we have a video like, things that you shouldn't do with fountain pens, lots of intros, lots of fountain pen 101, these types of things. I've touched on these ideas before, but I kind of just like, what am I feeling right now are some of the top things for new people getting into pens. So it was kind of tough to narrow down because there's a lot. I'm going to do my best. It's not going to be super, super specific, like tactical advice, just because when you're trying to give 3 pieces to someone new to something as deep and rich in its intricacies as the fountain pen hobby, I'm going to talk more about like principles or approaches, okay, than like the specific little tidbits. So my first one would be that really the journey is the reward. Okay, so fountain pens are not a one-size-fits-all kind of experience. There's a bit of a exploration process that goes on, and kind of a self-discovery process. For most people getting into fountain pens, they've either not had a lot of experience with fountain pens, they maybe have never used one before in their life, or they used them a long time ago and maybe they're very different now than it was when they first used them, and just the world has opened up in terms of ink and pen options and stuff like this. So I think a big part of the experience is figuring out what's right for you specifically, and that you're really the only one that can determine what that looks like. I and others who are reviewing things and talking about them, either other pen people that you know, can have our own preferences, opinions, and ideas and feedback and stuff like that. But I can say from everybody working at our company, all the numbers of different customers that we've had, it is a very personal decision which fountain pen things you like And a lot of people have very different experiences with the same product. So I think there's a very wide range of things that people find appealing about them. And that process of discovery is a lot of the enjoyment of the fountain pen experience. So don't be discouraged, I guess, if to summarize this point, if you don't find out right away what the perfect thing is for you. Just enjoy learning more about them and discovering them along the way, and you'll have a good time. My next piece of advice for new users is think about the trifecta of the pen, ink, and paper, because all three of those can impact your writing experience pretty well, I was going to say impactfully. Of course it's impactfully because it's impacting. But it can be very meaningful amount of difference in your enjoyment of the writing experience depending on how those three things kind of combine together. The pen, I think, is probably the most impactful one just because the tip size, the feel of the pen, that's what you're actually touching. But the paper and the absorbency that it can have, the dry time, the feel of the nib on the page can matter based on the paper. And of course the ink, you get into all different kinds of properties of ink, like dry time and shading and hue, and is there a sheen or a shimmer to it, the color, the saturation, these types of things, how it flows out of the pen. All of these things come into play. This is part of why it's such a discovery process for new people, is because there are so many different factors that go into it. But those are the big three. So if you think about what are the things that are going to make a difference? If you're using terrible paper and whatever ink that you had laying around, then maybe that great pen you've heard a lot of things about doesn't seem so great because you don't have the other two legs of the stool, so to speak. So think about those three things. And then the last bit of advice that I have, I'm assuming you're pretty new into it, is to try to learn as much as you can from others. And engage and interact with other pen people. One thing that's really special about this community is just how engaged we all are, be it in person or online especially. So there's tons of communities, that you can get involved in, everywhere from Goulet Nation, our Facebook group. There's other Facebook groups out there. There's forums like the Fountain Pen Network. There's Reddits. There's Ravelry. There's all kinds of, there's Pen Addict Slack. There's all different ways that you can plug in with different communities, all centralized around fountain pens. And there's lots of different educational things that you can, just spend your time learning about. There's our YouTube channel here. Obviously, we've got 1,800 videos or something. I forget the count. There's Fountain Pen 101 series that we've put out years ago that really lays out start to finish, like how to learn the basics of fountain pens. There's other like bloggers, YouTubers, people like that. Stephen Brown, SBRE Brown, and Gourmet Pens, Fig Boot on Pens, Pen Habit, Pen Addict, Pen Boy Roy, and many others. I don't want to exclude anybody intentionally here, but you can just do basically YouTube searches on fountain pen reviews, and you can see the good stuff that people are putting out there. There's lots of other people that have good blogs putting out comprehensive kind of educational, entertaining content. Because this is a very enthusiast-driven community, you're going to get a lot of people who are very excited, very willing to share what they know and share their experiences about fountain pens. And you can just kind of soak all that up, and just really, it's the kind of thing, like the more you get involved, the more you get out of the hobby, and I think there's a lot that you can learn really at any level of pen experience, the more that you get plugged in with the community. So to summarize that, the journey is the reward, enjoy the process, think about pen, ink, and paper and how they work together, and then engage in the community and learn from others. And I think that's just gonna give you a very rich fountain pen experience. Cool. All right, Inkskine on Instagram asks, what pen part would you say is the unsung hero of the writing experience? Then in parentheses, the feed. This is a really good question. I don't know that I've ever been asked this before. I definitely think the feed is an unsung hero. I'm gonna be thinking through this as I write. I have an answer in mind, but we'll see if I still feel that way at the end of the question. The feed is definitely like a very hard-working part of the ink delivery system. that really determines basically does your pen function well or not. It's pretty important. And it's, you know, is it unsung? That's the word I'm really hanging on for this particular question. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into the feed. It's really inside the pen, except for the part of the fins that are, you know, exposed maybe. So you'll see like the back end of the feed here a bit, but you really don't see as much of the working part of the feed. Like it goes all the way in here. You're only seeing maybe half of it, and it's covered up by the nib. So the feed definitely does factor in for some people, but it's, you know, does it get enough of its glory is really the question. So, you know, it's hard working part. It has to balance out the interchange between air and ink. That's how the capillary action is allowed to flow through the pen consistently. So without that proper balance of the air-ink interchange, it's either going to dry up and not write well at all, or it's just going to gush and just leak everywhere. And in fact, in the earliest days of the fountain pens, like early 1900s or so, that was like the big kind of like land rush of the fountain pen manufacturers. Waterman and Parker and Walt Eversharp and all these brands were coming out with patent after patent after patent for these different feed designs, because that was really like the magic key for how reliable a fountain pen would write. And you think about, like, especially at the turn of the century back then, the fountain pen would have been the main tool, like the main portable tool of communication back in the day. And if you were, you know, going on a business trip, or you had business to take care of, and you pulled out your pen and ink had leaked everywhere, or you pulled out your pen and it wouldn't write or whatever, that could be pretty darn frustrating, if not embarrassing. But that was definitely something. And you look at like old advertisements, they're advertising left and right about the reliability of the pen and blah, blah, blah. All that was still in development, and a lot of that was around the feed and the ink delivery system. So, you know, I think that it is super, super important. But I'm gonna think through some of the other parts of the pen that I think could also be contenders for unsung hero. But you did definitely land somewhere when you mentioned the feed. The nib, okay, I don't think the nib qualifies. It's definitely a super important part of a fountain pen. It's iconic to really what a fountain pen is the nib. So I am gonna say no, that's not the unsung hero, because I think the nib is the sung hero of the fountain pen, right? Like that's what everybody thinks of. So no, I'm gonna rule out the nib, even though, because it's so distinguishable and identifiable as a fountain pen. You know, Colin on our team, he said maybe the converter. And I thought about that, and I was like, the converter is a bit of an unsung hero. You know, because without that, you would be stuck to using cartridges, which are often proprietary from one pen to another. You know, thinking of like Lamy as an example. Love Lamy pens, nothing knocking Lamy. But if you want to use Lamy cartridges, you're stuck to the ink choices that you have with Lamy. Or using, you know, a syringe or something to refill the cartridge. Not ideal. The converter allows you to use whatever bottled ink you want. It can really open up some doors. But the thing is, it's not common on every pen. It's only cartridge converter pens. It's not something that is, I mean, there are a lot of cartridge converter pens out there, but I don't know if it's like universal enough to be considered the unsung hero. I definitely think it's a contender though, for sure. Another part that could be considered is like the inner cap seal. And I am thinking, did I grab a pen that has enough of an inner cap seal? Here we go. TWSBI's really good. They have a lot of good cap seals, especially like the Eco 580, even the Go that I have here. So the inner cap seal is basically this little plastic part that's inside the cap of the pen. You most of the time can't even see it. You can see it on the Go right here just because, well, the cap is clear, so that helps. And you can see that when you put the pen, how do I hold this so you can see it? There you go. So when you cap the pen, the nib essentially is inside that seal, rather than being inside the entire cap, which may or may not, you know, have a Loctite seal on it. That little insert is ensuring that the nib is fully sealed and that the ink won't evaporate out of the pen, which is super handy. Think about a brand like Platinum, which I did notice I have a Platinum over here. So their 3776 Century that they have has a slip and seal mechanism inside, so it's a proprietary design that they have. It's got a little spring in there, and you can actually see it in this this Kumpu So it's got a spring design, and they advertise that you can get a good seal for 2 years. So you twist it in place, and then as it goes down, it compresses that spring, really locks it in place, and really seals up that nib well. And it does actually work quite well. So that's their kind of proprietary design. But other brands like Pilot has a bunch of really good ones. TWSBI's really good about that. And then kind of by design of the pen here and there throughout different brands, you'll have that happen. So I think the inner cap seal is not something that everybody's necessarily has on their radar. It's usually hidden away inside the cap. You're not really thinking about it too much unless it doesn't seal well, and then it is a problem. Then it's more of a satisfier than it is a delighter necessarily. But I do think that it can make for a really good writing experience, particularly if you like to go longer periods without refilling your pen with ink. If you're using one pen continuously pretty regularly, the cap seal doesn't really matter so much because you're replenishing that ink so quickly, you're not going to notice any evaporation that would be happening anyway. But over a long period of time, it really can make a difference. Or if you have something like a shimmering ink or a permanent ink that can maybe be harder to clean out of the pen every now and then, having a better cap seal will make a difference. So that one could be a contender. Is that one more unsung than a feed? I don't know. Other things that could be on here, I put cap threads. Because I really find cap threads to be something that's important. I think it's something that, again, is kind of like when you have an inner cap seal that doesn't seal well, it can be like, why is my pen drying out? What's going on? People may even not identify what's going on, but cap threads can be something that, if they're too sharp or too close to where you're gripping, it can be uncomfortable. It can determine how quickly and easily you can cap and uncap the pen based on how many rotations you have to do. If you have a pen that's like multiple rotations, there's some pens I know that are like 3.5 or 4 rotations. You're like, freaking screwing this cap on all day long. When can I just get this thing closed or open? So I super appreciate, intentional designs. Like one of my favorites is Visconti with their hook safe lock. I praise theirs all the time, but basically it's like 1/5 of a rotation. Very, very cool design on their cap, and that's it. So super satisfying to cap and uncap. There's a number of pens that have really decent cap threads, whatever it might look like. But there's some that are snap cap, so I don't know if the threads really count. But I do think that can make a difference to the functionality of a pen. Another thing that I thought about too was the grip of the pen. I think the grip of the pen makes a big difference. Some pens, the grip is like a shiny metal. It can be really slick. Sometimes there's a really hard taper. Sometimes it's too thin. Sometimes it's too thick. The grip of the pen really matters. That's the part that you're touching the most when you're actually writing with the pen. So that could be super impactful into how much you enjoy actually writing with your pen. Now that said, that kind of falls into the same territory to me as the nib. Like a lot more people are thinking about the grip. Maybe it's not like something as if you're new to it that's the foremost on your mind, but I think as you're writing with the pen, you'll realize pretty quickly if you have a grip that you like or don't like, and that can become something that you're pretty conscious of. So not sure if that falls into the unsung portion of the whole question, but for sure it is a less sung probably part of the pen. I thought about like the clip of the pen. Is that unsung? No, it's fairly well covered, I think. It's less vital probably than most other parts of the pen. It does serve a function. A lot of times, I almost never clip my pens into anything. But I think even for me, it's there's some aesthetic value to it, but it's kind of a roll stop as well. I think it's sung well enough for me. So there may be other parts of the pen that I thought about. It could be other little things like, I don't know, the finials or the whatever, little pieces and parts. I didn't really think that they were, critical enough to really warrant falling into this category. So I think after I thought through everything, went through this whole process, I was like, let me not just immediately jump to the thing that you suggested in the title of the question. But I think after thinking through everything, I would settle on the feed as being the most unsung hero of the pen. It's definitely something that some people think about a little bit, but even probably not to the depth of true importance that a feed can have in the proper functioning of a pen. Now that said, there's a lot of different feed designs out there. Pretty much if a fountain pen is sold to the market, it's already been well thought about enough to be able to function properly. So it's not necessarily like some feeds are terrible and the pen is useless and other feeds are really good. I mean, I think the feed is really, really important to every functional fountain pen that's out there. But I think that basically without that, the whole rest of the pen is pretty well useless. And it kind of goes with the nib too, but those two really pair together. And being the fact that most people are not talking about feeds or know exactly even how they work and how they're designed and what that really matters, I think that that is probably going to be where I settle as my choice for unsung pen part hero. Cool. All right, Gershon Brooks on Instagram asked, can you get a decent representation of a brand's high-end pens when using its lower-end pens? For example, comparing a Platinum Procyon with a 3776. Obviously, they have different nib materials, but do you think things like nib widths match up? This is a really good question. I'm surprised I don't get asked this a lot more. So yes, thinking through this a little bit, I'm glad you asked it. I'm happy to talk through some of my thoughts. The short answer of it is that it varies. It matters more with some brands than others. So I tried to go through, and I'm going to talk today about some of the ones that I feel maybe do represent a little bit better, some of the ones that maybe don't, and I can at least prompt the thought further for you. So using the Procyon and the 3776 as an example, you're talking about pretty much in all these examples, but you specifically mentioned these two pens, Procyon steel nib, 3776 gold nib. Right there, the nib is going to make a bit of a difference. I looked at my writing samples that I've done for both pens, and I think if you're really getting nitty-gritty and comparing how does the medium width of the Procyon compare to the medium width of the 3776 or the fine or whatever, there's going to be a little bit of variance between the two. So I think if you're thinking like, I want an exactly same line width writing experience, that's not necessarily the case. I think what you see on these two pens is pretty common with what you see with most other pens, in that probably the nib width itself is pretty similar, but the fact that the nib on a gold nib, the nib material is going to be a little bit inherently softer than stainless steel. You're going to get a little more generous flow, especially if you have a slightly heavier hand. I have a slightly heavier hand, so you're going to see some of that slightly broader line width, all else being equal, with a gold nib than you might with a steel nib, just because the tines are going to tend to want to open up just a little bit more to make it write just a little bit wetter. That I find is pretty common, pretty universal among most fountain pens, is that most gold nibs tend to write just a hair wetter than stainless steel. That's not a universal rule, but is common enough where I think I can fairly safely make that approach. And specifically with the Procyon 3776, that does kind of be the case. Now, the writing experience overall between these two pens, the 3776, even though it's a gold nib, is still a relatively stiff gold nib, so the writing experience is not going to be as drastic with that as it would, say, using Visconti as an example. Visconti's stainless steel nibs they would have on, say, their Breeze or Mirage, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, those are going to be significantly stiffer than what you would see on a Homo sapiens or an Opera Master or something like that. The variance between those is much greater, almost uncomparable. So there might be other things about the pen, fit and finish, general design, things like that can come into play. I think in terms of nib width, I had one more thought on that to get back to. For something like Platinum, right? Like they're a Japanese pen company, and this goes for Sailor and Pilot as well as other. I don't have a lot of experience with other Japanese companies, but I imagine it's similar. They tend to grind their finer nibs a little finer than their Western counterparts. So I think that is something that is kind of common between the steel and gold nibs of the same companies. Platinum and Pilot especially, I have more experience with those brands. Both their steel and gold nibs, in the extra fine and fine especially, Not as much in the mediums and the broads, but a little more in the extra fines and fines. Those are going to be ground a little finer across both high end and low end than, say like a Lamy or a Pelican, as examples of Western pens, Visconti, these types of brands. So that is something that does kind of translate between, okay, would a lower end pen give you somewhat of an idea of a higher end pen? So if you're looking at getting a Pilot Custom 823, that's going to write pretty different, in some respects than a Pilot Metropolitan, as an example, or a Vanishing Point. So the difference between a Vanishing Point and a Metropolitan, the nibs the design is completely different. It's gold versus steel. The size is completely different. The feed design is different. So it's going to be definitely a different writing experience, but still the extra fine and fine nibs are going to be finer on those than they might on a Lamy or a Pelican or something like that. So I do think in some respects it can be an indicator. In other respects, maybe not as much, especially in like nib feel, smoothness, and flow and things like that. That's where it varies the most from low end to high end, pretty much on most brands. But the width can be a closer indicator, sort of, with most brands. Again, not Visconti. Other things, let's see here, looking at Lamy, so comparing like a Safari to maybe a Studio or a Lamy 2000. So you get a good sense of like the fit and finish of a pen. It's got that kind of German precision, and you'll get a sense of, what the materials are like and so on, which some of them may be similar. The nibs themselves are going to be a little bit different for something like a 2000. But, if you go with something like going from a Safari to maybe a Studio or a Lux or a Scala, they're going to be basically similar nibs to what is on a Safari. So in that respect, it really would be a similar writing experience. It's just the pen body that would be largely different, with the caveat that some of their pens, some of the higher end Scala CP1 Studios might have a 14 karat gold nib that you would also see on things like the Emporium, that are going to be a different writing experience. The Lamy Dialogue 3, those are going to be similar in look to the steel Lamy nibs, but they're going to write different. They're much smoother, bouncier, much wetter. So that's where one caveat will be there. But even still, it's not a terrible comparison between those. So, I mean, generally speaking, if you like the way that a steel nib Lamy writes, you're definitely going to like the way that a gold nib writes, because it's going to be more enjoyable, I think. Other aspects of the pen, like between a Safari and a Lamy 2000, they're largely just very, very different pens. So not as much to compare between those two. Kind of similar between like a Pilot Varsity and Metropolitan, maybe comparing that to like a Vanishing Point or a Custom 823. There's going to be a lot of different things on those pens. You get a general sense of maybe just the build quality and some of the design aspects maybe across some of those models, but they're going to vary quite a bit, so your mileage may vary there. Looking at Pelican, so Pelican, they sell some lower end pens that are like in their like kid pens, which is like the Pelicano Junior, the Twist, some of those types of things. Those are not at all indicators of some of their higher end stuff. Looking at, at some of the lower end of, let's say, the Souvron series, like the M200, and comparing that to an M800 or 1000, the writing experience is going to be a little different, because you're going to, these are the steel nibs on the 200, the gold nibs on the 800 and 1000, a little softer writing experience and these types of things. But overall, it's still a piston fill mechanism. You still get the interchangeable nib units, and overall style is similar. So these, I would say, it's a pretty decent, for what it is. I mean, obviously it's going to be different the higher end you go, but I think it's a pretty decent representation. So if you like an M200, you're almost certainly going to like things higher in the series. So if you wanted to ease into Pelican, starting with M200 is not a terrible idea. What else we got here? Even on some of the higher end stuff, like looking at Namiki as an example, looking relatively to the price, some of their Emperors might be, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000. But if you go with, a Yukari or a Nippon Art or something like that, that is, under 1,000 or around 1,000, those are going to give you an introduction to Urushi lacquer, Maki-e, those gold nibs. I think that is a pretty good representation if you're starting to get into some higher end stuff like Namiki with some of that Japanese artwork. That can be a pretty good stepping stone, as you get up into the Yukari Royales, even if you get into like some of the Pilot custom Urushi and stuff like that. I think you're going to get a good sense on some of the lower end stuff, and then the higher end stuff, the pens are bigger and just more elaborate. The artwork is even more impressive. But I think that there's some crossover there. Looking at some of the other pens like Visconti, Aurora, Montegrappa, they have some really high-end stuff. Their low-end stuff is really pretty different from their high-end stuff. I think most of the Italian brands are probably that way. The low-end stuff is really quite a different range of product. Diplomat, I was looking at them, they're low end, like they have the Magnum, which is around $20. Does that really compare to an Aero or an Excellence? It really doesn't. It's a completely different pen. So I don't know that I could say that with Diplomat that it would be the case. So it's really going to vary quite a bit. It's actually not super, super common for a brand to have a $20 or $10 or $20 pen and then a $500 or $1,000 pen. It's actually relatively few companies that have such a broad range. I think most pen companies tend to kind of focus in one particular area, and then every now and then they might come out with something special that's like kind of crosses those barriers, but there really is kind of a focus that most companies tend to have. The really larger ones may have a broader swath of product range, but I think a lot of companies tend to more or less stick to their wheelhouse. I'm thinking like Montegrappa, for example, really focuses on high end. The Elmo that they have is really the lowest price they've ever had. They, have a few different colors, but it's not like this wide range of lower end stuff. And it's even still, it's a couple $100. It's not super, I wouldn't even think that most people would consider that entry level. It's entry level for Montegrappa. In the same respect, Lamy, they have mostly, it's kind of intro level stuff, and they don't have a lot of high end. They have a couple they've come out with, the Lamy 2000, kind of would fit in that range, Dialogue 3, Emporium, and that's kind of it. And not a whole ton of that. It's not a huge focus for their brand. They are definitely more like, the pens for the people. So I think each company tends to have their own area of focus, and the needs are very different across those price ranges, so that the pens do tend to range quite a bit. So I think that as much as I would probably love to say that getting a lower end pen within a given brand is a good way to get a sense of that brand, and that you can kind of grow within that brand if you become a collector and you really get into it and you want to grow up. But I think it's so kind of pick and choose, and it's inconsistent enough where I can say it's not a universally applicable statement to say, yes, if you get an entry-level pen, you're getting a good sense of that brand as a whole. And I think, part of it, if you've been into fountain pens for a little while, you may even know like certain brands, like, man, they really nail it with this, and this model, whatever the price range. But this other one, yeah, this is really, they're kind of flops. They didn't really nail it with that one. That's really, like every pen brand you can pretty much pick and choose. And it might be your own personal opinion that other people could have very different views on anyway. But I think that, it's just not consistent enough to say like, yeah, for sure. Because there's just so much to it. Every pen that comes out basically has to be designed from scratch. And so you're going to get pretty much each pen, no matter the price range, is going to need to be evaluated more or less on its own accord. And that's kind of how I feel about it. But you can disagree. All right. I got an ink question. This is from Six Wings Studios on Twitter. Is there a fountain pen ink that will adhere to glossy paper, say a magazine or a catalog, hoping there are inks that will not only dry to glossy but actually adhere, not just wipe off? Field Notes Expedition waterproof synthetic paper would be the extreme example that I hope for. Well, Six Wing Studio, this is a question that I typically would be very tempted to, no pun intended, gloss over, because I've answered variations of it before. But I was like, you know what? We got a couple different types of inks that have come out since I last broached this topic. Let me actually write with some on some paper. I just so happen to have a copy of the Field Notes Expedition notebook. So this is with basically a waterproof, like a synthetic, it's like a plastic paper. You can't really tear it. And it's meant to be like you can write in the rain. They actually sold like specific ballpoint refills that were designed for this paper when they came out with this notebook. This was a couple of years ago. I actually keep basically every seasonal field notes since we started carrying the brand. I keep one. I've got this huge bin of every single field notes seasonal edition we've done. And so maybe this is just validation for myself to be like, aha, I'm justified in keeping one of everything because you never know when you'll need it. But I was actually kind of curious. So I did write with it. I chose some different waterproof ink choices. Dang it, I meant to write with some non-waterproof, but I know that those are pretty much going to be a hot mess. So I didn't really approach those so much. Then I also just happened to get in my most recent copy of Pen World, a little bit of love for David Oscarson on the cover there. And I flipped over to the first page I could find that had some decent white on it, which just happens to be an article about Visconti's nib changeover. So there you go, a little bit of love to Pen World. So I wrote with, this was with a glass pen. So, being fair, this dumps quite a bit of ink down, but I figured why not go extreme if we're trying to test it. So in my testing, I used Noodler's Black. No, I just lost my page. There it is. All right, so I used Noodler's Black, which is a cellulose reactive permanent ink, which basically needs to soak into cellulose, like wood pulp fiber. I am not anticipating that is going to hold up well at all. And then I chose a couple of pigmented ones. So I used Platinum Carbon Black, which is it's different. It's not a dye-based ink. I'm sure it has dyes in it, but it actually has a pigment. So it's a son of a gun to clean out of your pen if it ever dries. But it does better. It actually dries onto the surface of the paper instead of needing to soak in like Noodler's does, for example. Similar aspect, I have some Sailor Kiwaguro. This is the Nano Black ink. Similar concept, so I use some of that. I have an old bottle of this Pelikan Fount India ink. It's essentially made, it emulates like an actual India ink. Will destroy your pen. Don't use that. But this is like meant to emulate India ink, but is safe for fountain pens, supposedly. We sold this years ago. I have not sold these two in some number of years, but I keep everything because I'm a hoarder. So I was like, let me bust these suckers out and try it out on my ancient field notes here. We're just digging into the archives this week. Other things that I wanted to try, I grabbed a couple samples. I had the Platinum Classic Lavender Black, so that is a iron gall ink. I wanted to see what that would do. I have the Diatramentis Document Black ink, and so I used all of those on the paper. So I'll start out with the field notes. Now I've not tried to smear any of these yet, but you can see my samples there. Yeah, they're mostly black. Some things that I did notice on them is, particularly if you see over here the Diatramentis Document, it gets kind of splotchy over here. And it does that in a couple other places, like down here with the India. Some of that might have been, the glass pen doesn't necessarily flow so great with some of these pigmented or iron gall inks. So that may be part of it. But no, literally it was like beading up on the surface of the paper. I think what was happening is anywhere where I touched this paper, the oil from my fingers was sitting on it and the ink did not sit as well on it. So that right there, whatever the ink aside, that's going to be a problem because oil and water don't mix. Oil from your fingers is not going to be great if you have a very glossy ink-resistant paper or water-resistant paper. It is going to be an issue with your finger oils when trying to write on it. So that right there is something, yeah, you can see down here with the Platinum Classic Lavender Black. The lavender part didn't look great. And I did this, let's see here, I've been recording for 48 minutes already. I did this about 15 minutes maybe before I started recording, so it's been at least an hour. And I don't know if you can see the glossiness of this, but there are a couple of inks on here that are still not dry. Specifically Platinum Carbon Black. Noodler's Black is still just chilling hard on there. Diatramentis Document Black is still there. Platinum Classic Lavender Black is actually doing okay. The Pelikan Fount India is okay. Sailor Nano is okay. So I did that, and then looking at the others, I didn't do the Sailor or the Fount India on here, but I did do the others. So I was going to just do a swipe on all of these and see kind of how they hold up. So Noodler's Black in the magazine. Oh, I can definitely, oh yeah, that's not so great. So it definitely smears, but it's like a powdery kind of smear. I can actually feel the texture of the ink a little bit. Give you a little sense there. So it's not super great. It's workable probably, and if you use a pen with a finer nib, it probably wouldn't be so bad. Platinum Carbon Black. Actually, the Carbon Black looks pretty okay. I'm actually surprised because it looks kind of shiny and it looks like it should smear. Okay, I'm getting it to smear a little bit on the carbon, and I put that down heavy. So that's actually not as bad as I would have thought. Let me wipe my fingers a little bit here because I'm getting residue from the previous inks on here. What else we got? The Platinum Classic Lavender Black. I can get just a little bit of smear, but actually, it's actually a very respectable. That I'm kind of surprised about. So that's a pretty steady iron gall ink that works pretty okay. Diatramentis Document Black. It looks so shiny. It looks like it's still wet, but that actually does okay. So there you go. With some heavy finger smudging on this magazine, I'll try and get it to focus in there so you can see what's going on. Noodler's Black didn't do so well. Not a shock at all, again, because that is a different formulation of ink. It really needs to absorb into the cellulose of the paper. The other three, though, did a pretty respectable job. So I think the Platinum, the Carbon Black, that is a pigmented ink. That is also comes in pigmented blue. I think they have a sepia and a rose color. The Platinum Classic Lavender Black, any of the Platinum Classic inks, those are iron gall inks, and those will, there's a number of those colors, 8 or 10 or something like that. I would anticipate that pretty much any of them would perform like that. And then the Diatris Document, I'm actually kind of surprised the Document held up so well. Excuse me. Now, going to the more extreme end, this paper is literally like made to not receive fountain pen ink. And so let's see here. Noodler's Black, shall we? Let's start out with that one. Actually, I'll do Noodler's Black last because I anticipate that's going to be an issue. So Classic Lavender Black. Oh yeah. Okay, look at that. So big difference there. The Platinum Classic, not so great. Really smears hard. I mean, it's still visible, but that's not really what you want to have happen. Let's see here. Platinum. I need a better way to like hold this up somehow. Let's see here. Oh, I don't want to get like something on my. I don't have good things to hold up. All right, whatever. I'm just gonna make it work. Platinum Carbon Black. Oh no! I thought Carbon Black would have held up better than that. So that's not so useful. All right, I got to use different fingers. I'm getting so messy with this one. The Pelican Fount India. How did that hold up? It smears, but it's surprisingly better than the Carbon Black. I'm really shocked. I would have thought Carbon Black would have held up a lot better than that. Okay, Diatramentis, the Document. Oh boy, that's not ideal. Yep, basically useless. I'm running out of fingers. Let's go to the other hand. Sailor Nano Black. Yep, it's also kind of doing like the Platinum Carbon Black did. Not to the same degree though, so that's okay. Okay, and then Noodler's Black. Oh, let's go thumb, shall we? Noodler's. Oh, that's no good. That is the worst of all the bunch, which is, again, not a shock. Surprisingly, I am really surprised that the Pelican Fount India ink in the fuggliest bottle that I think I have ever seen. I think that this is the winner for this specific paper, which basically you should never use with fountain pen ink anyway. There you go. That's really interesting, really surprising. No one wanted that ink when we sold it back in the day, and maybe no one still does. So we don't sell that ink. Maybe you'll want it now. You live and learn every single day. But in an actual glossy magazine, I think the Diatramentis Document or the Platinum Classic actually held up better than I would have thought. If you are using literally a plastic synthetic paper, pretty much shouldn't use it with fountain pen ink, but Pelican Fount India was the best of the bunch, though even still, I don't think it would be great. And honestly, you know what I want to do? I want to test something. I want to really just destroy this Fount India because I think it's lying about how durable it is. If I get my finger just a little bit wet Oh, no. Yeah, see, that's no good. You don't want any of that. So it's really not permanent at all. You can still kind of see it though, but I mean, really, if you're carrying this around and you're trying to write with it, and you get wet and you get hand oils, it's going to be a mess. Just look at my fingers now. Like that is just not how you want to be. I like really don't even want to touch my keyboard right now because this is going to be ridiculous. But anyway, that was kind of fun. I thought you might enjoy that. But anyway, not a huge shock. Not really ideal for any of these, but now you at least have some options. And I got to get my fingers a little bit inky, which I do still love. All right, I got to rock and roll. I got 2 more questions for you this week. Let's keep going. Thanks for hanging in there with me all this time. All right. Mark H. from Facebook. The only one. The only Mark H. I'm just kidding. Most important one in this question anyway. Why or how do ink manufacturers work with an ink retailer to develop an exclusive only available through that retailer? Why? Why would they do that? Who would do such a thing? Well, I have an interesting perspective on this, being that I am a party to the flip side of this, the ink retailer. I think partly it's just fun and interesting to do. You know, this is a very passion-driven industry, very passion-driven, community. From the retailer side all the way up to the manufacturers, especially ink makers. The ink makers, none of them are like buying yachts, okay, because they make so much money. They are all in it because they just really love it. And so I think it's just fun and interesting, and it's a good partnership. It's for a lot of boutique ink companies especially, they're trying to maintain interest and relevance in the pen community, and that can be definitely fueled by doing exclusives within a certain retailer. I think the brand, whatever the ink brand is, there's a lot of different ink brands out there. If a brand does a retailer exclusive, then they can get some extra love, extra attention from that retailer. So of course they have to pick and choose their retailers wisely, because if they do an exclusive, they have to be able to basically sell enough to make it worthwhile, but at the same time they're committing to that exclusivity with that retailer. So it's got to be a win-win for both sides. So it's got to be worth it for the retailer to want to invest enough in whatever the minimum kind of batch size or the willingness of the manufacturer to be able to do an exclusive. That's why I think you see a lot more exclusives with some of the more boutique ink companies like Noodlers, Robert Oster, Diamine, and a few others that have done some of these things. I think the smaller ones are making things in smaller batches. They're maybe trying to get their name out there a little bit more. They maybe have more of a personal relationship, or they've done pen shows or whatever with these retailers. So there's just a little more relationship there to go off of. Huge companies like Pilot, like we're never going to get an exclusive Iroshizuku color because Pilot is making that stuff by like the train load. Probably, okay, maybe not the train load. That seems a lot. But they're making this stuff in large batches, and they're going to have to sell a lot of ink to go through all the process of developing a new color of some kind. Pretty much no one retailer is going to sell enough volume to justify a larger company like Pilot doing that. Now that said, if they ever approach us with that, I might be interested in talking about that. But it's never really been seriously in conversation, because we would need to commit to probably thousands of bottles. I mean, maybe tens of thousands. I don't know. It's never really even been seriously a conversation. Whereas another smaller boutique ink manufacturer might be a couple hundred bottles. That becomes a little more realistic. Did I mention Diamine? I think I mentioned Diamine. Yeah, they've done some. So yes, the brand, what they can get out of it is the manufacturer. They can be more specific, maybe more targeted about whatever the theming is with that ink. Thinking about Noodler specifically, because I think they've done more than anybody else, can work and really incorporate some specific history or political things, or things with nature, or specific events that are specific to the area where that retailer is. We have done 2 Noodlers exclusives ourselves that we have helped design. We've had other exclusives that Noodlers has already developed, but we have done two that we've co-designed with them. The first one that we ever did was Noodler's Purple Heart. And part of the motivation with this is we wanted like a Virginia history theme because we are based out of Virginia. I was born and raised in Virginia. It is a George Washington themed one. George Washington's estate is, you know, about 2 hours from where I live. And George Washington came up with the Badge of Military Merit, which turned into the Purple Heart Award. So there was good theming around that. Nathan's a big history buff, so we were able to incorporate, you know, my passion, appreciation for George Washington, the local Virginia founding fathers kind of theme, the American history. It all kind of worked. But that specifically, that color, Nathan had already developed, you know, kind of that color, and he was like, hey, I've got this color. Could we incorporate this in? And I looked at it and I was like, okay, it's not apart from the theming, I wouldn't necessarily have been like, yeah, this is the purple that fills all my hopes and dreams. But I was like, yeah, this is a cool purple. It's kind of different from some of the other things you have. The theming is great. Let's go ahead and do this as an exclusive. And here we are years and years and years later, still having it. The one that we're more known for, and who's really synonymous with both of our brands, is Liberty's Elysium. It's very much of a Goulet blue. This one, we approached him and we were like, Nathan, we want a Goulet blue. And a lot of it was, we want a permanent blue ink. There wasn't really a great permanent blue ink. We weren't able to get it 100% as permanent as we wanted it. And believe me, we did several different formulations, and even, you know, did some samples and polls and stuff like that as to which we wanted. But there's a trade-off when you deal with permanent in a blue dye, that basically the more permanent you go, the more desaturated, the more chalky it ends up looking. And it was like, oh. You know, if you think about like the Noodler's Upper Ganges blue, I don't know if you are familiar with that, or like a periwinkle or a luxury blue, those are much more permanent than Liberty's Elysium, but there's a huge trade-off in, you know, the flow, the saturation of the color. It just, you loses so much of its vibrancy of color. We didn't really want to go that route, especially because there's already several colors that exist. We were like, we want the vibrancy of the Goulet blue in as permanent an ink as we can get, and that was Liberty's Elysium. And then of course we incorporated again kind of some of the same dual theming. So Nathan is from New England area, and so we incorporated some Nathan Hale in here, and we incorporated Patrick Henry, and so that really worked out well. Yeah, he's got Nathan Hale and Mary Dyer on here, so that is very much like old school, like Massachusetts, New England, and then we've got Patrick Henry because I grew up like 15 minutes from where Patrick Henry was born. So again, that Virginia history, and Patrick Henry gave his Liberty or Death speech, which is like, you know, I've been to that church where he gave that speech. It was pretty cool. So lots of cool things that you can do when you collaborate like that. But like if Nathan was to make this and just sell it to everybody, it'd be like, what the heck, Patrick Henry? You know, that's like, okay, fine, but it's much more relevant having that relationship there, and you can tell a cool story. You know, the actual process of it, you know, it's pretty simple. It varies a little bit depending on the parties involved, depending on the retailer, the manufacturer. It largely involves kind of the manufacturer having the capabilities and maybe their own bandwidth, creative resources, willingness to consider it, and so on. You know, I mentioned there's kind of a batch size that they need to be able to just kind of do to be worth. There's a certain amount of like fixed time, cost, effort, whatever you want to call it, that's involved in developing any new product or carrying any new thing, distribution, all that kind of stuff. That has to be kind of covered in a certain size of whatever's done. I mean, the amount of time you would spend to develop one bottle of one new color, you'd have to sell it for like $5,000. It wouldn't make sense, but you sell several hundred or thousands of bottles of ink and it becomes, you know, basically the same price as any other ink. So it's got to make sense in terms of the manufacturer's batch size, how much the retailer can sell, etc. Let's see here. So manufacturer may already have a color in their lineup that can just be repackaged. That's one option. We've never pursued that. We always wanted to do something that was unique. We've done exclusive with Noodlers. We've done it with Colorverse. We've done it with, oh gosh, who else have we done it with? I'm trying to think. I don't know if we've done it with Robert Oster. We've been proposed with Robert Oster. We could do our own, but they come out with so many different colors anyway, that it hasn't been as obvious of an opportunity to do that. So certainly we could. We can approach that with many other different manufacturers. But the thing is, with that, you know, obviously you could come up with custom theming or packaging or design or whatever and just take an existing ink and do it. I'm not as crazy about that. I'd like to do something a little more interesting. That certainly can happen and be a possibility out there. But I like to come up with, yeah, I've said the same thing 3 times already. I won't say it again. So retailer may want something specific proposed to the manufacturer. Manufacturer may have something that they've developed that they just haven't rolled out into an existing product yet. So they may have several things kind of out there in the wings, you know, and they may propose that as, hey, we've wanted to do this thing. You know, it's not universally appealing enough, but if you guys wanted to buy X number 100 of bottles of it, then we would let you have the exclusive and we could get it out there to market when otherwise we wouldn't be able to because of all those fixed costs of rolling out a new product. So sometimes that can work. Other things like the name, theme, artwork, that could be done by really either party. It depends on what their resources are and who has the vision and all that kind of stuff. A lot of times it's very collaborative. The pricing, packaging, shipment, terms of payment, all these details are very negotiable, but it's all got to be figured out and settled on, right? So the bottom line is it's actually quite a bit of work to come up with any exclusive. That's why you don't see them all the time. Some manufacturers are a little more nimble, a little more willing to do that than others. So you see more of manufacturers doing that, some than others. You know, a lot of times, yeah, things get proposed and it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I appreciate that you want to go that route, but that's not a color that I think is going to sell well, or we're just not the right time for us to invest that much into a single color. Because, you know, when we buy one batch, if it doesn't do well, it might take us 2 years to sell that ink, and that's money that we're tying up in other things, and you know, so it can be a lot of fun and interesting to do these kind of things, but it's really got to work out well for everybody. So you'll certainly see more of them come out from time to time for, you know, the retailer or manufacturer that's willing to put in that work. But there you go, curtain is lifted a little bit, but largely it's a process that I've enjoyed very much, mainly because there's so many good people in this industry to work with, and they're all pretty reasonable, and everybody's kind of aligned towards the same goal. It's really not a money grab. It's on anybody's part. It's pretty much, hey, is there something unique and interesting that we can create for the community that would get people really excited? Can we make the logistics work? Oh, we can? Great. Oh, we're really going to introduce this and get really excited. And if we're like, oh, we really can't, okay, well, maybe next time. We'll keep thinking. We'll keep talking. That's the general vibe behind the whole process, which is just really cool and very rewarding. All right, last question for this week. Boy, I've gone long on this one. Told you, it's a good one. I'm just enjoying doing this Q&A. So this is a personal question from Adam W. on Facebook. I just want to know your thoughts about travel. Before November 2017, you had never been outside of the country. Since then, you've been to Germany, Japan, and Italy. And how has this been a change for you? Yeah, it's been a very eye-opening couple of years for me. If I want to get super technical, it was December 2017 that I went to Heidelberg to tour Lamy for the first time. It was the very beginning of December. Not to get too semantic, I'm impressed that you are even that close with the time frame. But, you know, yeah, it was definitely hugely impactful. I am, you know, I had sort of a humble upbringing. I definitely did not travel a lot when I was a kid. Like, my parents had a business out of the house. They worked an insane number of hours, nothing fancy. They were in the printing industry. So the travel that they would do for work would be like driving to the local print shop, and they would be talking business while my sister and I were like playing in the lobby of the print shop, like making up radio talk shows and, you know, riding pallet jacks around printing presses. My parents didn't like it when I did that, but I would just get so bored sometimes. But anyway, so the most that we would travel would really be like, you know, we would drive to see family. My family is from, you know, Connecticut and Massachusetts and all that. So we would like drive from Virginia up there multiple times a year to see my parents' family because their families were both up there. That was basically am I seeing the world. And then we'd like maybe go to Virginia Beach, which is like a 2-hour drive, very local kind of beach, not a big whoop. But that was like our big family vacation, like a long weekend there, maybe a week. That was about it. So I really hadn't traveled much of anywhere. When I was a kid, did one trip with my parents. They took us out to California when I was 13. So that was cool. I got to see Yosemite, got to see San Jose, San Francisco, do the Fisherman's Wharf and Lombard Street and all that stuff. That was really cool. Like, I didn't fully appreciate it at that age, but I appreciated it enough where it really stuck with me. And then aside from that, I really didn't travel. Really hardly at all until this business. And then, my wife and I were in college, we got married, we had no money, started this business. We were not jet setting. So it really wasn't until a couple of years ago where I started to really travel more for business, got involved in some networking groups and started traveling for some e-commerce conferences, traveling to see manufacturers in this business. But it's really been such just a surreal experience for me. And I consider myself just very fortunate personally to have been able to travel and see as much of the world, obviously the pen world, as possible. I've toured 8 different pen factories now, 8 or 9. It's been so gratifying for me so far. And then I want to see even more, just because I appreciate it so deeply. I'm just very, very grateful to be in the position that I am. So for me personally, traveling for the Goulet pens is the best way for me to travel. I'm not like super organized. I try really hard, but both Rachel and Jen, my executive assistant, will tell you I am constantly bucking against my own systems that I try to put in place. I'm just not a super structured, organized person by my nature. Much more improvisational and that kind of stuff. So when I travel, I will get to where I need to go, but maybe not in the exact time frame, and I certainly will not have a specific itinerary. So when I'm traveling for Goulet pens, I am very fortunate in the fact that I'm often traveling with our distributor or the manufacturer. I'm getting, basically kind of chauffeured to a degree. That sounds really fancy, but I'm being led to see some specific things, to see some specific aspects of their local culture, their factory, their whatever it might be. I'm not just left to my own devices, because I would go to a place like Florence and I would be like, where do I go? I would just walk around and be like, pizza, can I get some pizza? And I would have a very random experience there that would not be quite as curated as I am when I'm traveling with people who live locally in that area, or people who've traveled to that area a bunch of times, and can really kind of show me some of the best impression as a first timer to those areas. So I'm very fortunate in that respect, in that, I keep joking. It's like, when I went to Japan, I was like, the culture there was more different than anywhere else that I'd ever traveled. And I kept being like, without a phone with GPS, for sure. Like with a phone with GPS and the ability to translate on an app, for sure I would be locked away in a Japanese prison somewhere right now, because I would have wandered off somewhere that I wouldn't have known where I was going, offended someone somehow with something, and not been able to explain my way out of it. And I kind of joke with Rachel about that. That wouldn't actually be the case, but I was very respectful over there. But still, it was just it's how I am. It's not my strength zone to be in a foreign place, because my memory is just not super great. But that's just very fortunate to be not only in this business where I am, but at this point in time in history with technology and so on. Would be very different for me if this was even 30 years ago. And it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who is an engineer, and he does some travel for, he does like big industrial engineering. So he'll work with like, huge industrial plants, helping them design custom equipment for their things. He will travel to places that are like rather obscure and really not scenic. He'll be in like random deserts in Africa and, places like, backwoods parts of Germany and, places like the middle of nowhere India. And so I'm like, okay, that would be a little bit different experience traveling to some of these more obscure places, but I'm getting to travel to places like Tokyo and Florence and Bassano del Grappa and Torino and Naples and all these kinds of things. I'm like, this is not so bad. A lot of the fountain pen cultures are in some pretty cool places, so that's pretty rad. So not only do I get to see some of these most iconic pen companies in their rich histories, but I get to see really some established cultures, and being that I'm an American, getting to see some of the European cultures which heavily influenced, the modern American kind of culture. I learned about things in the history books that I'm getting to see in person, and I'm just like, whoa, this is so cool and so different, and it's such a richer experience getting to see some of these things that I've only read about. So that's pretty rad. I've been very humbled by just seeing how big of a place the world really is. And being that I've traveled to places largely that we are doing business with, in these countries, so heavily influenced by kind of Western culture and American culture, so a lot of the places that I've traveled to, there is, they understand English and all these types of things, and there's a general sentiment of positivity towards most American culture. So I've had a pretty good experience when I've been traveling for the pen business, and so for me, it's been interesting to see, the good things that they perceive of American culture and the things that are maybe, not as good, which I fully understand and respect as well, the things that are richer in their culture and some things that they, as I'm traveling to see these pen factories and stuff, some of it is, we're talking pens, we're talking business, but we're also talking culture and life and politics and government and economy and really get into it pretty deeply, especially when I have time to spend with the owners of these businesses, because we can speak kind of owner to owner, and just getting perspective on, the education system there and child rearing and, the culture of cooking versus eating out and genetically modified foods, and you can cover a wide swath of different things, and just seeing the perspective that different cultures have, it really just enriches my experience, and I'm always just like a sponge when I soak these things up, and I'm like, everywhere that I've traveled, no matter how different the culture has been so far, for me, I come away with such a deep respect and appreciation for where they come from. Even if I have a difference of opinion about certain things based on my perspective and where I've come from, I still greatly respect that that's where they've come from. And that's kind of what it's all about, just broadening horizons. I think summing it all up, there's just far more that makes us all similar than there is that makes us different. Even though things may look very, very different or may come across very different based on the particular intricacies of our cultures and the way that we communicate and things like that across cultures, specifically like, Japan to America and things like that. I think that there are definitely common things, honor, trust, respect, integrity, hard work, family, just legacy, wanting to, portray your passion, enthusiasm, and art, and all this kind of stuff. This is really common throughout at least all the pen businesses and all these different cultures. So that's been really, really rewarding to know, even if we don't speak the same language or understand each other in all respects, there's a huge common thread that is really throughout all the pen industry, but really in all these cultures too, of this passion and creativity and drive for quality and storytelling that comes across it all. So, as much as I love all of that stuff, of all the times I've traveled, I've been gone, I think at the most maybe 11 days, and that gets a little long. But as much as rich as the experience I have, and I reflect on it very fondly every trip that I go on, boy, it feels so good to come home every time. I love coming home. I love being home. I love where I live, my family, the culture we have at Goulet Pens, and it's really cool. So it's like, I love going. I love coming back. I really just love the whole process. I'm so grateful to be able to do that as much as I do. I know that it may not always be in my future. Hopefully it will. I enjoy traveling. It's something that for me, other people that I know have traveled. Travel can be really hard on some people, jet lag and things like that. It's like I've had 14, 15-hour time changes with Japan, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever, for Europe. I actually travel really quite well. So that's part of why I have leaned into the travel a little bit more. Rachel, not as much. It's much harder on her. So we've been very selective about where we've traveled together. So for me, I'm just going to lean a little harder into the travel than maybe she will. But that said, I consider myself like an ambassador to our company and to the pen community whenever I travel. So I always try to make the absolute most of it when I do. All right, my question of the week for you this week, if you are still awake and watching this Q&A after such a long one, what was the first place that you ever traveled internationally? Maybe just get into that a little bit. What was your impression? What did you really take away from that trip? Some context around it. Everybody's got interesting stories to tell when they travel internationally. So maybe that, or if you've never traveled internationally before, because I never had before I was 33, if you are hoping to travel somewhere internationally, or would just maybe dream one day, where would you like to go, and maybe why? Just leave that in the comments, make some good banter and some good conversation in the community here. So you can check out some of the products here that I talked about in this Q&A on gouletpens.com. I really appreciate you hanging with me this week. Still enjoying it very much. I hope you're having a great November. Thank you so much for watching.